Our scripture reading for today is from Matthew 28, verses 1 through 10. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to view the tomb. There was a violent earthquake because an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and approached the tomb. He rolled back the stone and was sitting on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes was as white as snow. The guards were so shaken by fear of him that they became like dead men. The angel told the women, "Don't be afraid, because I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples. He is risen from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. Listen, I have told you." So departing quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, they ran to tell his disciples the news. Just then, Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." They came up, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus told them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to leave for Galilee, and they will see me there."
Can any of you remember back to when you were a child and you had something exciting coming up soon? You know, something that you looked forward to with anticipation, the longing that you had as you waited for that day to come. Maybe for you, it was Christmas morning. And you were looking for the day, you were counting down the days. Maybe it was just an exciting family vacation. Maybe it was just hanging out with friends. Yesterday was my son's 8th birthday. And so he had been counting down to this day for over a month now. He was always asking me what the date was and doing the math in his head. And the big thing that our kids look forward to is our time hanging out. So what we try to do for each of our kids is we try to get childcare for the other kids. And me and my wife take that one child and we just give them like a budget to go spend some money and just take an afternoon and do whatever it is they want to do. So my son knew that he wanted to go to the trampoline park, first of all, and then that he wanted to go buy some shoes. And so that's what we spent yesterday afternoon doing. He was hyping himself up to this day for a long time. We'd find YouTube videos that he had been watching of trampoline parks, just to go watch people doing flips. So he'd kind of hype himself up for that moment. He loves like this day to celebrate his life. Even last night as we were laying him down, he asked my wife, he said, "Can I get one more happy birthday, please?" So he just wanted to hear it one more time, like happy birthday, it's your day. And I love that. But we all know that feeling, right? When you have something that you're just looking forward to and you can't wait to experience it. And so that's one kind of waiting or longing that we experience, where you know something good is coming. It's just a matter of when it's going to happen. But there's another kind of waiting, the waiting, the nervous waiting, where you don't know the outcome of the situation. Okay, maybe that's the tension you felt as a teenager when you're figuring out if you made the basketball team or not, right? Or the drama club or whatever it is. Or maybe, the person you're going to ask to homecoming. You're like, are they going to say yes, right? Or the person you like, do they like me back? And you're wondering that, right? Sometimes it's much more serious than that. I remember when our son was only just a few years old, he had this lymph node on his neck and they weren't super concerned about it, but he was having a tonsillectomy anyway. So he was going under and they said, "Hey, we're just going to remove that and test it to make sure it's not cancerous." And so as parents, you just hear the word cancer, right? And if you search WebMD, like everything seems to lead to that, but you hear about this and you're concerned with it. As young parents, our oldest son, our first kid, we're like, man, that's like, it was stressful and taxing and we're just waiting. It's nervous. It was worrisome. Wasn't an exciting time at all, right? And everything turned out fine. But during that waiting period, our hearts were just under that stress. And so today in our text, we're going to get to see a woman who's sitting in the weight of waiting. This longing and hoping that everything was going to turn out okay. But in the moment, it didn't seem like it could. But because of the resurrection, we're going to see that her waiting and her worry were turned to wonder and joy. And that because of the gospel, that actually has implications for us here today, right now, that reality can be true for each of us. Before we dive fully in, I do want to just take a moment again and welcome each of you to this gathering of New Eden Church here at the Albany. As I said earlier, my name is Joel McCarty, and I'm one of the pastors here. I especially want to welcome those of you that are visiting with us today for whatever reason. Maybe you got dragged here by family. I don't know, right? It can be intimidating to walk into a new place where you don't know anybody. Maybe some of you bring baggage. Maybe some of you have been hurt by the church. Like, I don't know where you're at today, but I want to say that you are welcome here in our midst, and I commend you for the courage to just gather with us as the body. Our prayer is that you feel welcomed in our midst, and we don't just say that. We really believe that because Jesus welcomed us when we were strangers and welcomed us in his family and friends. He says, I don't call you servants, but I call you friends. And so we want to welcome you in that way. As you know, today is Easter. It's this day on the church calendar where we celebrate the fact that Jesus is risen. He defeated death, hell, and the grave. And at New Eden, we don't just say this. We're not just trying to be different. This isn't something we just celebrate once a year. Every single week, we gather to proclaim the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. It's in the songs we sing, as we take communion, as we preach. Every sermon is geared towards that end. Everything we do is centered around that purpose. And not just on our Sunday gathering, but also as we live life together in the Monday through Saturday, whether that be at your jobs, in your career, at your education, whatever it is for you, we want to see the gospel on display and declared through all of life. And so because of that, you're not going to see much different here than you're going to get on another day, except I'm wearing this jacket because I can get away with it on Easter. And everyone's like, what are you doing? You actually dressed up and wore a collared shirt and not a t-shirt. But yeah, we're doing that. And we're singing more songs than normal because I can get away with that too. Typically during our preaching time, what we do here at New Eden is we pick a book of the Bible and we look at the gospel, how it's on display and how it points to Jesus through that text week after week. We've been through the Gospel of John most recently. It's been a sweet journey. I think we're somewhere in chapter 4 right now. We took a 2-week break from that last week and this week to look at this series called Worship and Wonder. And we're looking at this idea of the death and resurrection of Jesus through the Gospel of Matthew. Today, we're going to be in specifically Matthew chapter 28, the first 10 verses there. You can follow along with we'll have it on the screens for you. You can also Google it on your phone or with a physical copy of the scriptures, whatever you prefer. So if you remember last week, it was Palm Sunday, and we saw in our text, Matthew 21, that Jesus rode into Jerusalem as the king, but this king was not like other kings of the day. He came in humble and riding on a donkey. He knew that in just a few short days, he was going to die for the sins of the world. He knew as he rode into Jerusalem that he was going to willingly lay down his life to rescue and redeem rebels and to transform them into sons and daughters. That was how the week started last Sunday. And today we're going to see how the week ends. That same week called Holy Week in the church calendar, that late Thursday night and early Friday morning was when Jesus was arrested and taken, think about this, taken to be tried by the very humans he created. He would be abandoned by many of those he had just eaten supper with the night before. Peter, one of his closest disciples, friends, would deny that he even knew Jesus at all. And eventually, after much commotion and conversation between the religious leaders and the crowd and the Roman authorities, Jesus was beaten and whipped and led to the hill of crucifixion. And this is the dark lament of Good Friday. It's what we've been sitting in these last couple days. The crowd stripped him. They mocked him. They spit on him. And they put on his head this crown of thorns, which was meant to mock the declaration that he had made that he was king. And eventually they lead him outside the city and place him on this torture instrument, this Roman cross. They want to put an end to this nonsense about a coming kingdom. They want to end it and do away with it. After some time, he's going to eventually surrender his life to his Father. On the cross, when he says this language, I love it, full trust in his Father, into your hands I give you my spirit. And after he breathed his last and died, he would be taken to a borrowed tomb where his body would rest on the Sabbath, on Saturday. And this is the setting that we find our story today in Matthew 28. Let's read the first verse of that chapter together again. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to view the tomb. So here we see at the dawn of that Sunday morning, what we now call Easter or Resurrection Sunday, these two women go to view the tomb where Jesus had been laid. Now, to fully immerse ourselves and understand this text, since we're kind of just dropping into this narrative, I think it's important to point out a couple things, specifically introducing one of our characters, Mary Magdalene. She's mentioned here along with what's called the other Mary. Most likely is kind of the third Mary in the gospel narratives. You have Mary, the mother of Jesus, right? We know her. We have Mary Magdalene, and then this third Mary that's mentioned here. Mary or Miriam was a common name in this culture. It's not surprising. Even here in our small body, we have a lot of double names. This like a theme we have. We have two Joels. We have two Chris's, one male, one female. We have, what else? Two Joshes, right? Maybe more. I don't know. So we're always like in conversation. We're like, wait, which Josh are you talking about? Which, Joel are you talking about? And so we understand that. So he makes this note about Mary Magdalene. So we kind of pay attention to her. The first we hear about Mary Magdalene is from the beginning of Luke chapter 8, where we see her mentioned along with Jesus, the 12 disciples, and this other group of women. So we're told in this narrative that Mary Magdalene was someone who had had 7 demons cast out of her. And Jesus had come to her, had healed her, and had changed the trajectory of her life completely. We're told that she, along with other women of means, committed their life to follow this Jesus, and that these women of means were actually supporting and funding his ministry and the 12 apostles as well. And I love this because these women weren't just kind of relegated to the background. Sometimes we have this idea that it was like Jesus and his 12 disciples just like living off the land. And maybe sometimes they did that, but like they had these women traveling with them is the vision we see, funding their ministry, taking care of their bills and things like that. These women weren't just relegated to the background to stay out of the way of the real work. They were like this huge part of what was going on with Jesus as he declared and displayed his kingdom to the world. And this is consistent with the pattern of Jesus' ministry, the way he interacted with women as he constantly tore down the presuppositions of the culture of the day. And often we miss this massively important role of women in the gospel narratives. And the story of Mary Magdalene helps us recover that. She is this amazing, strong, courageous woman. The Gospel of Matthew specifically records Mary Magdalene and other women, I want you to see this, following Jesus throughout his many trials on Good Friday morning, all the way up to his burial and beyond. And there's this contrast between Jesus' disciples, the 12 apostles, and then these women who are here as his disciples. During the darkest hour of Jesus' life, his 12 disciples forsake him or deny him, but not these women. You actually see them, and Matthew mentions it over and over. They're watching as close as they can. They follow him to the burial site. They're standing there facing the tomb as he's being placed into the tomb. Matthew 27 tells us that. As one commentator put it, Mary Magdalene was the last at the cross and the first at the tomb. We see some of Jesus' disciples whose faith had wavered. And alongside that, we're given this vision of these two Marys who stayed unwaveringly by the side of Jesus all the way through his burial. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I think their story, the strength of these women is inspiring and amazing. And I love the part that they play in this resurrection narrative. But I want you to place yourselves in the shoes of this Mary Magdalene for a moment on Easter morning. The one that you had given your whole life to, you had traveled with the last few years, you had given money to, he's now dead. All the investment you made in this ministry, you didn't get much of a return on it. The leader is dead. The Messiah is gone. The whole purpose you had given your life to now seems empty. And it's the third day since he had died. I want you to imagine that walk to the tomb on that Easter morning. Most likely it wasn't the first time they had been to the tomb since Jesus had died. How many more times could they make this walk without great disappointment? See, no matter how strong their faith, no matter how deep their commitment, there was a reality staring them in the face that their Messiah was dead. All the followers he had amassed now scattered, full of doubt, full of fear, like any one of us would be as well. And so even though their courage is commendable, Without the resurrection, their courage is nothing more than a foolish pipe dream, meaningless hope. But this morning, this time, when they came to the tomb and got there, something was different. As they come around the bend, the scene they would have seen was different than what they had ever seen before. As we read earlier, there was this earthquake and an angel of the Lord rolled back the tomb and then the stone door of the tomb and sat on it. Now, most likely this had happened before they ever arrived. The other gospel narratives kind of make that clear. The way Matthew writes it, we kind of assume, he never explicitly says this all happened right when the women were watching, but we kind of assume, because we read everything chronologically, that this happened after they arrived. I think the reason Matthew places it here is because he again wants to contrast these big bad guards, right, who were like the best in the land, there to guard the body of Jesus, who what happens when the angel shows up, they fall down in terror and they either play dead or like pass out from fear. We don't know which one, but they look like they're dead when these women arrive. And so we see the contrast of these guards and these women who only cared about, didn't even honestly seem to acknowledge the angel much when we read the narratives. They just said, "Where is Jesus?" Like that's all they cared about. And we're told this angel is like terrifying. It's not like the little, chubby, precious moments angel that we picture. Like he's like lightning. He's wearing white garments, shining bright. Like it would freak anybody out. But these women don't seem to be that bothered. They're just saying, "Where is Jesus?" And they have this conversation with the angel, more of a receiving input from the angel. They get to the tomb. You can imagine the emotions that are swirling as they see this empty tomb. They're trying to figure out, maybe piece together what Jesus had said about rising again, but also wondering, did they take the body of Jesus and just steal it away somewhere so we couldn't anoint it? The angel greets them, gives them some encouragement and instructions. Look at our verse 5 of our text in Matthew 28. The angel told the women, "Don't be afraid, because I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he is risen from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. Listen, I've told you." The angel tells them, you have no reason to fear because of the one you're looking for. He's not here. He's come back alive, and he invites them to come and see inside the tomb. The stone was not rolled back for the benefit of Jesus. He didn't need that to walk out of the tomb. He's already gone. But the angel wants to invite them and any one of us to come look inside and see for ourselves that Jesus is no longer there, that the tomb nor death could contain him. And before anyone else, this is the first we see, the angel declares to this woman the good news that would change the entire course of history. Jesus is alive, just like he had been promising. And I know you didn't fully understand what that meant, and I know you might be piecing it together now, but this is the plan all along. He's risen from the grave. And then she tells them to go with the good news to the other disciples. She entrusts them with this message. And they run off to go be the first preachers of the gospel message. And almost immediately, though, as we read a moment ago, before they even get too far, they actually come across Jesus himself. And can you imagine what that must have been like? I mean, the man that healed you a few years back, the one you watched just a few short days ago be put on trial, as you wept as he was beaten, he was marched up to Golgotha's hill to die. You saw them place his real dead body in a real tomb. And now here he is, just as real as he was before, in the flesh. And they do the only thing we can do when we come face to face with the risen Lord, which is fall at his feet and just worship him. And Jesus tells them the same thing the angel did. Don't be afraid. Go and tell the good news that I'm alive. And I love, he says, I'm going to meet my disciples, my brothers is what he calls them, which is beautiful. He says, I'm going to meet them. And I love this because Jesus meets us where we are. I mean, after his resurrection, as he appears on the Emmaus Road, maybe in the upper room, maybe to doubting Thomas, maybe on the shore where Peter had denied him and he just cooks Peter breakfast and restores him, Jesus meets us where we are in our doubts and our questions and our fear. Now, in this culture, to trust these two women with this important gospel message was unheard of. If you wanted trustworthy witnesses, if you were fabricating this, you would definitely get somebody influential, most likely a male, to, kind of tell this story and corroborate it. That's how it worked. We're actually told in the Gospel of Luke that when these women go back to tell the disciples, it literally says that the text says it seemed like nonsense to the disciples. They didn't believe them. These women didn't care. They had a commission. They were proclaiming the good news. And our culture hasn't been much different when it comes to listening to voices on the margins. Recently, I did a study on Phyllis Wheatley for a talk I did, and this young black slave girl in the 1700s, she wrote poems, and she was wanting to publish her first book of poems. And you know what they had to do so people would actually believe that she wrote them? They had to get 18 old white men to sign off. Literally, you can go look at it. They signed off that it was actually her that wrote it, so everyone else would believe them. But Jesus doesn't care about any of this. Like he always does, he upends the cultural expectations, entrusting the best news ever, this world-changing, life-giving message to these two women. Stayed by his side. The first preachers of the gospel declaration that Jesus was alive. And we would do well in our day to listen to voices on the margin who have intimately understood the gospel story. And in doing so, as we do with Mary Magdalene, we might get deeper glimpses into the transformative power of the gospel. When you look at the life of Mary Magdalene, you see the transformation that takes place in her heart as a result of coming into contact with Jesus. Not just at the beginning when her demons were cast out of her, but also on Easter Sunday, when because Jesus had risen, her worry was turned to wonder. We're told in verse 8 of our text that these women are filled with fear and great joy. Now, I don't think those are two things we often think of going hand in hand. Fear, this terrifying awe, but also great joy. I think this fear was primarily an awe at what she had just seen, and this fear of what it meant for her and for the entire world. Like every now and then, I feel like I get just a small glimpse of this. When I see God working and providing in ways that are so clear, like that it is him working. Like it was nothing to do with me or anybody else. That was all God. And this week I was just hit with some news, like that some things that God is doing through, with, and among our church family. And I seriously, it was almost like, as I got the news, I was just like having to catch my breath and slow down and breathe and like walk out to my office and just bask in the goodness of God. And I would say that in that moment, I was both overwhelmed with great fear and great joy. Joy because it's like, I'm getting to see God's goodness up close and personal. Like this is a blast. This is fun. I can't wait to see what happens. But then this fear, like because when I see God work, when I get a greater glimpse of his glory, it changes me. And sometimes that scares me because sometimes that's painful. And I know that when I see God and his goodness and his glory, like I'm held responsible because I'm not just saved from something, I'm saved to something, and I've got to share that good news with the world and steward that. But I love when the voice of Jesus comes and says, don't be afraid. I'm the one that rose from the grave. You don't have to control this. You don't have to manage this. This is up to me. Maybe this is a glimpse of what these women felt. See, the resurrection of Jesus, this Jesus who died for our sins on the cross, the one who succumbed to the evil powers of darkness, the one who walked into the deepest recesses of rebellious humanity, his resurrection from the dead actually changes everything. And if you don't hear anything else today, I want you to hear this. The resurrection of Jesus is not just some nice story. It's not just some metaphor. It's not some example for us in life to kind of take lemons and turn them into lemonade. The resurrection of Jesus is a story about a God made flesh. who dwelt among sinful men, who took on the worst injustice that the world could throw at him. He entered into the Father's wrath on behalf of us sinners. And he died a real death, was buried in a real tomb, and he really got back up on Sunday morning to defeat all the powers of darkness that attempted to snuff him out, to put an end to our sin and our shame forever. And this risen King, this risen Lord, Jesus, our Messiah, he is the only hope for us worriers and doubters and those of us who have demons or addictions, or those of us who wonder if all of our commitment and time and energy and money that we give towards kingdom work, we wonder if it's all in vain. Jesus, the risen Lord, is the hope for us all. Gazing on this empty tomb and the risen Lord it actually changes us, and it has real world implications. It's not just a fairy tale. It's not just some cute thing we do so we can dress up in pastel and go on a silly Easter egg hunt. Like Paul says, on this fact hangs the entirety of the Christian faith. Paul says that without the resurrection, if you get this, he's right, we're of all men most to be pitied. If Christ is not raised, I pity every single one of you. You're wasting your time here. I'm wasting my time. We might as well just go home and hang out with family. This isn't just something we do because in the South, that's what you gather, on Sunday morning, especially on Easter. If not for the resurrection, we should be looked on with great pity. Anyone who gives up their entire life, if this is all we have to live for and you give it up to follow this Jesus, what a freaking waste. But if it's true that he got back up out of the grave, this changes everything. Everything. Matthew gives us this detail that this resurrection happened on the first day of the week after the Sabbath. And he's drawing on this imagery from the first creation. When there was 6 days of creation, and on the seventh day, the same day as the Sabbath, God rests. This day of rest so that Adam and Eve could rest to then get busy on the first day of the week to go cultivate life and spread God's glory to the cosmos. And even though Adam failed, he points us forward to the new Adam, who on the first day of the week, as he rises from the dead, will begin this new humanity, this new creation. He's beginning this new way where he will bring life and flourishing and cultivate joy for all who believe. He will succeed where Adam fails. And it's all starting with these two women. I don't think it's an accident that in one of the Gospels, they notice him as a gardener at first. Then they see who he really is. See, Jesus is just the first fruits. The resurrection of Jesus, on it hinges everything. We just talked about that. But that's not the end of the story. That's the beginning of the story. And as we get caught up into his story, because Christ was really raised, we can actually have real hope. It's not just about this sweet by and by. If it was, you know what the early church would have done? Hey, Mary Magdalene would have ran and said, hey, Jesus is risen. Let's go hole up in a bunker and kind of isolate ourselves from the rest of the world because he's going to come back one day. And so let's just hang on till the end and not get too messy and be influenced by that big old bad world out there. No, they go and tell, and the Spirit of God comes on them like flaming tongues of fire and empowers them to go into the world and continue the new creation project that Jesus started on Easter Sunday. The kingdom burst forth in the here and now and gives us resurrection hope. And they're not engaged in these good works to earn God's salvation. No, but to display the salvation that had already been given by grace to the entire world and to declare it. So just like these women, when we see the risen King, we've got to go and tell. We begin formed into people who trust not in our own works or our own way. The resurrection was hopeless, but we trust in the miracle of Easter. A God who takes dead things and makes them live, who takes broken things and makes them whole, who takes useless ash just the remains of something that was burned and destroyed. And somehow, I don't know how it happens, but he turns it into something beautiful. And as we labor to share this, it's tough in a Good Friday world full of lament and brokenness, but we can have hope. We can wait with full assurance that Jesus will come back and make all things new because he came back the first time from the clutches of death itself. And so we can slowly be formed into moving from this nervous kind of waiting like I had when I was a kid, and when there was a beautiful day out, I thought Jesus might show up, and I was really scared because, my life wasn't great and I hadn't kept all the rules and done the whole list. Like when we see the risen Lord and we are brought into that story, we can look forward to that day with anticipation and celebration. And now, I long for that day. Last week we sang soon, and it talks about Jesus coming back, and it just hit me. And I just sat there weeping, I cannot wait for the day. And he's going to do it. And we look at the first resurrection to know what's going to happen. We await the day when we will be filled with wonder and joy as he returns to finish what he started. Unlike the women who came to the tomb, our waiting is no longer an if. He's coming back, but a when. And we're thankful for their message. And just like these two women, for those who are looking for Jesus, that was the key word. There's no reason to fear. As Jesus said, don't be afraid. For those who trust in the good news, the life, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, for those who throw themselves on his mercy, you are going to find the risen Lord. And he will turn your worry to wonder, your sorrow to joy, your despair to deliverance. And let me be clear, the resurrection isn't just some feel-good message. This doesn't mean we don't have sorrows or suffering. This isn't just this message that promises health, wealth, and prosperity in the here and now. That's damning. To see resurrection, Jesus had to first pass through death. And as we follow him on his journey, we have to do the same. It's the cycle of the Christian life. Things die. And as we relinquish control and quit trying to resurrect them ourselves, as we let them just die, Jesus will always show up and perform the miracle of resurrection. That's why we don't suffer without hope. Jesus will not only it's not that you just suffer and he's there with you. He is he empathizes with you, but he's also taking that suffering and turning it into a story of glory that will last for all of eternity. He's not going to waste your demons, your worry, your doubt, your trauma, or your pain. The resurrection of Jesus is the proof of that. And here's the thing. I've watched Jesus do this, not just in the future, though that's a massive piece of it. But I've watched him in the here and now take marriages that were heading for disaster and turn them into beautiful pictures of Christ and his church. I've watched him take men and women who struggled with addiction to drugs or alcohol or pornography. And they were turning to these to numb their problems, and these men and women were turned into vibrant, life-declaring messengers of God's grace. I've watched women and men walk through loss, death, cancer, depression, and other trials. And I've watched God just extend day by day measure of grace, whispering sweet reminders that I am with you. Don't be afraid. I will never leave you. Even as you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will be with you. I've watched him take people who didn't know how to come to God, didn't think they were good enough, full of shame and regret and anxiety. I've watched God turn them into bold, courageous kingdom warriors, confident not in themselves, don't be mistaken, but confident in the work of Jesus, confident in the fact that their heavenly daddy loves them deeply and that nobody can take that away. I've watched him restore relationships that were fractured for years. I've watched him bring home his wayward sons and daughters. I've watched him take apathetic people and turn them into some of the most passionate people about Jesus I know. I've watched him take men and women who only cared about getting the degree and making the money, turn them into people who are willing to give up their lives to go to the nations and share this gospel message. I've watched him take men and women who said, I could never be a part of a church family again. Not because they were bitter, but because they were hurt and scared and tired. And I've watched God take these people and turn them into people who love to gather with the saints, not out of duty, not out of guilt, but out of delight. And lastly, I've watched him take an arrogant, self-righteous young man who judged others constantly, could put on a good face, and was addicted to the praise of others. And that young man was me. And over the years, I've watched Jesus take me and turn me from this arrogant jerk into someone who's been humbled by the fact that Jesus loves me. With my baggage, with my arrogance, with my brokenness, and show me that my only hope is in him alone. And because he's done that, now, not by my own power, but I can truly weep with those who weep. I can actually celebrate other people's successes and mean it. I can let God do the transforming work in people's lives. I don't have to micromanage that. And I know that's real. And here's the thing. I couldn't have done any of that. That wasn't me waking up one day and saying, man, I'm finally going to get it right. I'm finally going to be a nice guy. I didn't just clean up my act one day. I tried that route, never worked. But when I saw the beauty and majesty of Jesus, when I saw his glory on display, when I saw his brilliance and his glory, it actually changed me and still is changing me and forming me. I know I've got so much longer to go. But I know he's going to return and he's going to finish the work that he started in me and in all of you and in the entire cosmos. He's alive. So whatever your story, wherever you come from today, whatever your background, whatever your baggage, I can't say I fully understand and empathize. I don't know all of you to that level. But I can do one thing. I can introduce you to one who does. I can just invite you to come and see the empty tomb. Either for the first time or for the millionth, I don't know where you're at. I can invite you to come see the nails in his hands and the wounds in his side and the shed blood that was for you. This is good news for rebels and sinners and the weak and the outcast. And I want to invite you to know and surrender to this King. He's good. He's worth it. And together, when we come and see, just like these women as a church, we can't help but go and tell. We invite others to come and see, telling them he's alive, and that just like his disciples who had rejected him and denied him, he's going to meet you wherever you're at. That's why we say all of life hinges on this, not just this Easter Sunday, but all of life. Gazing on this, focusing on this work. This is how we are transformed. That's why we can celebrate. That's why we can come in here today and actually smile. I know a lot of you. I know you've got brokenness. I know you've got pain. I know you've got hurt. I know that's real. But like here and now, as we are encouraged by this gathering of the saints, we can actually sing and mean it. We can sing, he is risen. We can shout and sing. It's the life of the Christian, where we look back on the resurrection, where the new creation was beginning, and we look forward to the second return of Jesus, when he'll complete the work that he began on Easter Sunday, when he makes all things new and the entire earth, along with all of God's people who are groaning to be restored, will be made right. That's the hope we have. And we can wait with anticipation and joy like a child waiting for Christmas morning. There's an empty tomb. And because Jesus is alive, this is reason to celebrate. This is reason to sing.